Hi, thanks for joining us as we discuss behavior strategies to help kids use their face masks. My name is Heather Skeen. I'm the founder of Providence Behavior Therapy, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Amanda Rutledge, and we will be your presenters for this event. So Amanda, do you want to get us started with the overview?
Sure. So tonight we're going to go over some general disclaimers. We'll introduce ourselves, go over some behavior basics and learn some proactive strategies along with some common mistakes, and then we'll do a quick wrap up at the end. But before we start, we're going to have some questions throughout, just some interactive portions of the workshop. You can write down your answers as we progress through the presentation, or you can just think about it to yourself in your head. If you write it down, you can submit the answers via email to Heather Skeen of Providence Behavior Therapy, and she will give you a certificate of completion. Any incorrect or incomplete submissions could affect how long it takes to receive your certificate and eligibility to receive the certificate. And you'll have 2 weeks from watching the video to complete the questions and submit your answers. And at the bottom, you'll see Heather's email, which is where you can submit your questions. And now Heather's going to go over some of the disclaimers.
All right, thanks. So please keep in mind that this is purely an educational event, and we're here to talk about general behavior strategies to increase the likelihood of children and students wearing face masks. So attending this event does not create or constitute a therapist-client relationship, nor does it create a supervisor-supervisee relationship. As such, HIPAA and other privacy protections are not applicable. We want to point out that completion of this workshop or event is a better word really, does not certify participants as qualified behavior intervention specialists or anything like that. Completion of this workshop can result in a certificate if you're interested in one. However, that is not any type of professional credential from a government or regulatory agency. And then as a reminder, you will have 2 weeks from the time you watch the workshop to answer the questions and submit them to me before receiving your certificate. We're going to quickly talk about unauthorized dissemination. And I would just encourage you to take a minute and look over this slide. The gist of it is saying that this material is copywritten by Providence Behavior Therapy and it should not be disseminated without written permission. So if you have any questions about either of those slides, feel free to reach out, but otherwise we'll move on to introductions. All right, so now I will tell you a little bit more about my background and experience. So like I mentioned, my name is Heather Skeen. I'm the founder of Providence Behavior Therapy. I am a board certified behavior analyst, or BCBA, and I've been one for 6 years now. And here in the state of Texas, I'm also a licensed behavior analyst, or LBA. And those two titles really mean that I specialize in behavior support and behavior-based therapy. So about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, actually later this month, I started working in the field of behavior analysis when I was in grad school for mental health counseling. And I started working at a center for kids with autism and just fell in love with it. So I've been doing those types of services since. Over the past 10 years, I've worked with kids as young as 2 through adults in their 50s, but primarily specializing in children and teenagers. I've worked with people diagnosed with autism, ADHD, intellectual and developmental disabilities, people with mood disorders, and people with oppositional and defiant behaviors or oppositional defiant disorder. About 5.5 years ago, I really started learning and using American Sign Language. And so over the last few years, I've also been working with the deaf and hard of hearing community. So that's about it for me. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Amanda and she can tell you a little bit more about her background.
Sure. My name is Amanda. I've been in the field of applied behavior analysis for about 10 years, and I've been a board certified behavior analyst, or BCBA, for 5 years. My undergraduate degree is in special education, and my graduate degree is in school psychology. I am the founder of the Bigger Picture ABA, and I also currently work at the University of Pennsylvania as a school-based consultant. However, I should note that this presentation isn't affiliated with Penn or any of my work there. I currently work with autism support teachers in schools on the implementation of evidence-based practices and more inclusive supports. In the past, I have worked with students with autism, developmental delays, ODD, anxiety, and other learning differences. I'm really passionate about using the principles of behavior to improve the lives of those I work with and also the systems that they're a part of. And now let's talk about what's the point. So why use behavioral strategies for mask wearing? And that's because mask wearing is a behavior. So in our field, we consider anything that could be done, good, bad, neutral, a behavior. And if it's a behavior, then behavioral principles apply. So today we're going to go into more detail on how to apply some common strategies to increase cooperation with mask wearing and make it more tolerable for your child or for your student. Before we go into behavior basics, we have our first question. So we are curious what your role is in helping children or adolescents use face masks. So are you a teacher, a parent? Do you work at a daycare? Are you a therapist or other support staff? So you can take a moment to write down your answer. All right, and now we will go into some behavior basics. So like I mentioned earlier, anything someone can do is considered a behavior. And it's important to think about behavior in relation to the environment. So in other words, behavior doesn't happen in a bubble. In ABA, we talk a lot about the ABCs of behavior. So the A is the antecedent, which is really just a fancy way of saying what happens immediately before the behavior. The B is the behavior, and the C is the consequence, or what happens immediately after the behavior. The consequence can either be reinforcement, which means the behavior is maintained over time or it increases over time, or it could be a punishment, which would decrease the chance of that behavior happening again in the future. For the purpose of this presentation, we're really only going to focus on reinforcement. So we're thinking about what could be done after mask wearing to help that behavior, which is the mask wearing, reliably occur again in the future. And I also want to take a moment to point out that 2/3 of this equation is the environment. So the behavior is definitely a big piece, but this is really empowering to think about because that means we can do more to make positive changes than we initially think. So now let's talk about function. So understanding behavior can help you change behavior. When we think about the functions of behavior, we're really thinking about why is a behavior happening? And all behavior happens for a reason. So the functions of behavior are attention, and that could be from adults or from peers, escape or avoidance, so to get out of something or to get away from something, tangible, which is just to get some specific item or object, or sensory, basically meaning it just physically feels good. So of course, this is really an oversimplification, as behaviors can be the product of multiple functions combined or occur only under very specific circumstances. However, tonight we're really going to largely focus on escape or avoidance because I'm sure we can all agree that mask wearing is aversive at worst, pretty neutral at best. Nobody's really wearing a mask because it's inherently fun or comfortable or enjoyable. In regards to mask wearing, there's different ways you could avoid it. You could avoid it by just not putting it on, or you could escape it by taking it off, which, like I said, is really pretty understandable. Mask wearing isn't particularly pleasant or comfortable. And tonight we're going to talk more about what to do to help encourage mask wearing, which, like I stated earlier, is really aversive to a lot of people. And realistically speaking, it's likely to be more aversive to children or students with autism, anxiety, developmental delays, or some other kind of sensory difference. And while mask wearing is unlikely to be anyone's favorite activity or something you would choose to do under typical circumstances, there's steps we can take to make it less likely that our kids or our students will try to escape or avoid that request. If mask wearing is so aversive, how can we make it more tolerable and increase cooperation when it comes to mask wearing? So the answer is reinforcement. We want to tip the scale. So without applying behavioral strategies to assist with mask wearing, it's hardly worth it to most children. So let's look at this example. So on one side of the scale, you see what the child gets out of not wearing a mask. They get to be comfortable, they get to keep doing what they're used to, and they don't have something extra to keep track of during the day. If you look at the other side of the scale and think about what your child or student gets out of wearing a mask, they're less likely to get sick, and an adult might tell them, nice job wearing your mask. But I want to mention not getting sick. Even though it's a really strong reinforcer to us as adults, it's probably less important to children. It's more abstract. It's pretty ambiguous. So throughout this presentation, I want you to think about how you can tip that scale using some of the strategies that Heather and I go over. And it's important to remember that all children are different. So the specifics of what might tip the scale for one child or student might not be the same as what tips the scale for another. And even going back to the scale visual, you can see that not everything's weighted the same. So in this example, being comfortable is the biggest box because that's the most important thing to this child, where not getting sick or an adult saying good job, they're not as important to this child. Next, we're going to talk about shaping. So shaping simply means reinforcing small steps along the way. So in other words, setting a goal and then celebrating the smaller victories. So I'm not a runner at all, so I'm not really sure why I chose this analogy, but you could think of this kind of like running a marathon. So you don't go from sitting on the couch, watching Netflix, never running, to running a marathon the next day. There's a lot of intermediate steps in between. So if you're a runner, which again, I'm not, so maybe this could be a good plan for me. You would set a small goal, something that's a challenge, but still realistically achievable. So for me, that might be running a mile without stopping. And then once I reach that goal, I would celebrate, which would be my reinforcement, by going out to a restaurant with a friend, assuming the pandemic is over. And then once I'm consistently running 1 mile, I wouldn't celebrate or reinforce that anymore. I'd instead increase my goal to something a little bit more challenging. So maybe now my goal is to run 3 miles without stopping. Once I achieve that goal, I would again celebrate or reinforce my success. For me, maybe I would get a new pair of running shoes, and then I wouldn't celebrate or reinforce 3 miles anymore. Once I had that pretty consistent, then I would reinforce another goal. So maybe running 5 miles. I would continue in that fashion until I had run a marathon. So this is an ideal scenario. In the real world, there's likely going to be setbacks. And one of the most common setbacks is setting a goal that's too lofty. If this happens, it's really not a big deal. All you have to do is just go back to a more manageable step and then increase your goal by a smaller increment and then build up a little bit more slowly. You might also need to go back if something unexpected or aversive happens. So in the case of running, maybe you get sick or you get a stomach bug. Running 5 miles isn't as achievable as it was before you got the stomach bug. You have to back up a little bit, back to 3 miles, and then work your way back up again. That's again, no big deal. The same might happen to your child or your student when they're wearing a mask. Maybe they had to wear their mask to an unpleasant doctor appointment or somewhere else that's not really their most favorite place to go, and the mask is aversive now. Or maybe they were outside taking a walk and it got wet in the sprinkler, but either way, the mask is now associated with things that are less pleasant. So just like with the running example with the stomach bug, you're just going to back up again to a step that you think is achievable and then work your way back up again. The last behavior basic I'm going to go over is desensitization, which is really similar to shaping. And in fact, those two strategies can work really well together when combined. So desensitization is about building up tolerance and comfort to help things not be so scary or uncomfortable or unfamiliar. So to use this strategy first, you want to meet your child or student where they're at and then build up from there. So if you look at this example, maybe the child will look at a mask, but they're not willing to even hold one. So if a child won't hold a mask, they're really not likely to go from that to wearing a mask in school or in other environments every day. So as we talked about shaping, there's a lot of intermediate steps in between, and you want to use reinforcement and shaping. So remember, we reinforce those small steps. So in this example, it might look like the child holding the mask, and then immediately after they hold it, they get access to some sort of reinforcement. Maybe this child really likes video games, so as soon as they hold the mask, they get to play video games for a little bit. And it's important to remember these reinforcers will really vary depending on the child. You'll do this a few times, build up some success, and then you would stop reinforcing holding a mask. and now you would increase the expectation a little bit, and now you want the child to hold the mask to their face. So you can see how this is a lot like shaping. So you're shaping by reinforcing those small steps or victories, but you're also desensitizing by slowly getting the child accustomed to the mask and decreasing their fear, anxious, or uncomfortable response to being asked to wear a mask. Generally, though, like I said, desensitization is a process that's used for experiences that are non-preferred or aversive, and it's not necessarily the most fun process to go through. Before jumping straight to the strategy, it's best to try to first make mask wearing as unaversive as possible using some of the proactive strategies that Heather is going to go over now. But before Heather goes over the proactive strategies, think about, or you can also write down if you're emailing Heather for a certificate, which one of these concepts do you think would be most helpful or relevant when you're helping your child or your student learn to use a face mask? And remember, you could choose more than one answer, and there's not a correct answer.
All right, now we're going to discuss some proactive strategies. So one concept we want to keep in mind when we're working on mask wearing with children is we want to try to make it as fun as possible. And really, is mask wearing fun? No, not really. As Amanda mentioned, mask wearing is neutral at best, but there are ways we can make mask wearing less aversive and more tolerable. And one of the ways to do that is incorporating the child's preferences. So you might start by looking at the material of the mask. Maybe the child prefers a disposable mask, maybe they prefer a cloth mask, or maybe there's another material they like best. You also want to consider how the mask fits your child. So there are different ones that loop around the ears. If you look at the picture here on the right, you can see a little girl with the mask that ties at the top of her head and then at the back of her neck. So really you can just ask your child, what preferences they have, or you can give them options to just try on. And if you can't necessarily have a conversation with your student or child about what kind of mask they want, then give them options and just sit back and observe. So maybe they try one mask and they keep it on for a couple of minutes. Maybe they try a second mask and they immediately remove it. And then maybe they try a third mask and they leave it on for several minutes. So that's the one you go with. So there are different ways you can adjust and try to figure out what mask is the best fit regardless of the child's skill level, their age, or any of those other kinds of factors. Another way to incorporate child's preferences is to use their favorite things. So their favorite colors, their favorite characters, things from their favorite shows. So if you have a younger kid, it might be, Paw Patrol or Mickey Mouse, PJ Masks, something like that. For older kids or teenagers, it could be a funny quote. It could be their favorite sports team. You can adapt that for their age and preferences as well. What's really nice about incorporating their preferences is it increases their interest in wearing their mask, and it likely increases their motivation or buy-in to wear a mask. And then similarly, when you incorporate preferences, you're able to provide people with choices. And when we give people choices, we know that decreases the likelihood of them engaging in refusal behavior or just challenging behaviors in general. And so what that might look like is rather than saying, hey, it's time to go, get your mask, please. You could say, all right, we need to go. You have your bread mask, you have your Mickey Mouse mask, or you have your Paw Patrol mask. Which one would you like to wear? And in both of those examples, the expectation is the same. It's time to put your mask on. But in the second example, we give them a little more choice and more opportunity to exercise some autonomy. So you're more likely to get that buy-in and you're more likely to get that cooperation. So another way we can make mask wearing fun, or at least less aversive, is associating it with fun activities. So if you see the pictures here on the left, you see the dentist office and you see the emergency room. And generally those experiences are pretty negative. So we want to have less of those experiences and more of the experiences shown here on the right. So maybe in that first picture, that second picture from the right, you have a family, maybe they're going to the child's favorite restaurant, or they're going to a park, or they're going to go see some friends or something like that. So you can say, all right, let's wear your mask, and then we can go to your favorite place, or we can get ice cream afterwards. So that way the mask wearing is associated with something fun. Another way to do that is if you look at the picture here on the right, you see a boy on a tablet. So you can also practice mask wearing during fun activities. And this might be a nice way to incorporate desensitization as well. So you could say, all right, you can have the tablet, but you have to wear your mask for 5 minutes. And if you keep your mask on for the 5 minutes, then you can keep watching your tablet. And so those are some different options for associating the mask with more positive experiences. And that's a nice way to kind of tip the scale, if you remember Amanda's metaphor earlier, and trying to make mask wearing more fun and more enjoyable. So now Amanda's going to talk more about how to make mask wearing manageable.
Thanks, Heather. So thinking back to shaping and desensitization, like I mentioned earlier, it's really important to start by meeting your child or your student where they're at. So you want to start small, but then as your child or the student is successful, you're likely going to be able to start making some larger jumps. So as you can see in this example, going from 0 minutes to 2 minutes and then 2 minutes to 5 minutes aren't really very big jumps. But then if you look towards the end of this example, going from 10 minutes to 30 minutes is a much larger jump. So it really makes sense if you think about it. In the beginning, you're really just trying to get the child used to and accustomed to the mask. But once they're used to it, it's easier to push more each time. And once you start wearing a mask, a long time just kind of feels like a long time. 2 hours probably doesn't feel a lot different than 4 hours. It's really a balance between pushing your child or student to go a bit farther, while at the same time not overwhelming them. So like we talked about earlier, you really want to remember that if there's setbacks, and really I should say when there's setbacks, because there will be setbacks, just go backwards to a more manageable step and then work your way back up. It's a lot better to back up and then it would be to engage in regular power struggles, which is only going to make mask wearing more aversive. And don't forget to celebrate the small victories and reinforce along the way. It could be really helpful to pick a special reinforcer or reward that you use just for mask wearing. If you pick something that your child or your student already has a lot of access to throughout the day, it might not be worth wearing a mask for, but if it's something that's more out of the ordinary, something more special that maybe they don't usually get, you're more likely to tip that scale. And then you also want to create rules or expectations. So realistically, it's really impossible to predict everything, but the more you can predict, the easier it's going to be to set clear rules and expectations. So you want to make mask wearing as routine as possible, and that's going to help your child or your student know what to expect and help minimize some of those power struggles. And if you think about it, even us as adults, we like to know these things too. So it would be pretty disorienting if you couldn't quickly predict where you had to wear a mask or who you had to wear a mask with, if you didn't know when you had to wear a mask or how long you had to have it on. It would be really unsettling if you had to put a mask on and then you had no idea when you could take it back off. And the same is true for our children and our students. The best way to set expectations is with consistency. You could also use visuals to help explain the rules. And Heather's going to talk more about how to make these expectations clear.
All right, thanks, Amanda. So now we're going to talk about different strategies to use to help make mask wearing more clear, or the rules around mask wearing more clear. So 3 strategies we're going to discuss are modeling, visuals, and conversations. And really, there's a lot of overlap between these 3 strategies, and they work together really nicely. And modeling, visuals, and conversations emphasize the rules or expectations surrounding mask wearing, or whatever it is you're discussing in general when you use these strategies. So with modeling, you can see in this picture on the left, the little girl has her mask on and her animal has the mask on. So that might be a nice way to go when working with younger children or children who really like stuffed animals. You can practice with their animal as well. If you have older children or children who might not be as interested in the animals or toys with masks, then maybe your modeling looks more like the picture here on the right. And you can see there's the adult wearing the mask and then the child wearing the mask as well. You can also use both of them. You don't have to pick one or the other. You could do both at different times. And so with these examples, You can discuss, well, what happens if I get frustrated while I'm wearing my mask? What happens if my mask falls off? What happens if my mask starts really bothering me? What can I do? So in these examples of modeling, you can discuss coping skills or coping strategies, and you can discuss appropriate reactions to different scenarios. Another good strategy to use is visuals. So this example we have here, as you can see, it's pretty simple. We use first then language, which is a nice kind of clear-cut way of describing what's expected and what's about to come. So in this example, we say first, we put our mask on, we go to the store, and then we can go swim. So when we're looking for visuals, there's many different options. If you do a quick search online, you can find lots of pictures, lots of videos, stories, those sorts of things. And with visuals, it's nice because you can easily adjust them depending on the learner's age, their preferences, and their skill level. So with this example, maybe it's a great fit for your child or student. Maybe you need more pictures, or maybe you need less pictures, and maybe you need more words. You can really adapt this and modify it as needed. And then the last strategy we're discussing is conversations. So here you see the woman, she says, "Can you remember the rules for wearing our mask?" And the boy replies, "I have to keep it on the whole time, and if I feel frustrated, I can ask for help." And then she follows up with, "Why is it important to wear our mask?" And he replies, "To help us stay safe and help others stay healthy and safe too." So what's nice about conversations is, again, like the previous two strategies, they really emphasize the rules and expectations. And they can also lead you to a discussion of values as well. So, it's important for our health and our safety and respecting other people. So it's a nice way to incorporate values too. Something I've found really useful when having conversations is for kids, but really people in general, we're more open and more likely to be cooperative and listen to what people are saying if they engage us in a conversation rather than lecturing us or telling us what we need to do. So this is kind of similar to providing choices. When you have a conversation, you allow someone to ask questions. You give them opportunities to share their opinions, to share their ideas. You are allowed to elaborate more if you, excuse me, you're allowed to elaborate more if you need to as well. So again, all three of these strategies are really good at emphasizing rules and expectations. All right, that leads us to our next question, question 3. Which proactive strategy do you think is most beneficial? And again, there are no wrong answers. This is your personal preference. So you have make it fun, make it manageable, and make it clear. And again, if you're submitting your answers for a certificate, you can jot those down. If you're not, that's fine. Maybe just take a second and think about it. Okay, now moving on to common mistakes. So Amanda will start us off here, and she will start by talking about how we want to avoid forcing it.
So we really want to do our best to avoid making mask wearing aversive, and we really want to avoid forcing it. So as you can see in this example here, the dad is saying, "You're not in charge, we're not leaving until you put your mask on." And the boy is yelling, "No," probably in the middle of a tantrum. So we want to try to avoid these kinds of situations by ending on a good note. So if you can anticipate that things are about to go south, then I would recommend offering to let the child take off their mask instead of waiting for things to kind of turn sour. So that way the child took off their mask because you offered that option rather than because of challenging behavior. So what I mean by that would be if your child is starting to whine, you can tell they're getting pretty agitated, and you know your child, you know the next thing they're going to do is take the mask off their face. Instead of waiting for things to keep going, as soon as you see that first sign of agitation, like when they're whining, just say, "Hey, do you want to take your mask off?" And that's what I mean when I said that they took their mask off because you offered that option rather than the challenging behavior. If it's not possible to anticipate challenging behavior and you can't tell that the child's about to take their mask off, it's best instead to try to get through that situation as seamlessly as possible and then reflect after to see what changes you might want to make next time to avoid a similar situation again in the future. So for example, if you're at the grocery store, your child takes off their mask, they're mostly calm, they're closed mouth. You can leave the store pretty non-eventfully rather than fighting with your child to put their mask back on. With their behavior escalating, maybe next they would start kicking and screaming. It's better to just leave, and then in the future you could maybe aim for a shorter trip and then shape back up. You could think about what reinforcement you could include. Thinking back to Heather's if-thens, maybe the then you had just wasn't quite right. Maybe it wasn't something that they're willing to wear a mask for, it wasn't reinforcing enough, or maybe it just wasn't going to work that day. Like I said earlier, reinforcers can change day to day, depending on a lot of factors. Another thing you could do is try to incorporate their interests during the time that they're wearing their masks. So maybe they really like PJ Masks. You could make some comments as you're shopping like, hey, that's so cool. You look just like Gecko from PJ Masks. Or other things like that, thinking about how you can incorporate their interests in the moment. Another thing you really want to try to avoid is taking things away. It's really easy and sometimes it feels good to do in the moment, especially if you're frustrated, but it's unlikely to lead to any kind of lasting behavior change. And in reality is likely only going to undo a lot of the hard work that you and your child or student have been doing to make mask wearing a more positive experience. And in the end, it's really not a fun or a pleasant way to interact with your child or student. And now Heather is going to go over 2 more common don'ts.
Right. So thanks, Amanda. So one thing we want to avoid doing is bribing. And from a behavior analyst standpoint, bribes can mean one of two things. One could be saying, all right, so first I'll give you this ice cream, but you've got to promise me you'll wear your mask, all right? And so in that scenario, what the problem is when you give the reinforcer before the behavior occurs, then you run the risk of the child losing motivation or an incentive to engage in that behavior because they already got the reward, so why put my mask on now? In the second conceptualization of a bribe, it looks more like this. So you ask the child to put their mask on, they refuse, and then you sweeten the pot, so to say. So you might say, all right, please put your mask on, then I'll give you some ice cream once you have it on, okay? And then maybe you say, okay, once you have it on, not only will we get ice cream, but then we can go to the store and maybe you can pick something out. I don't know, we'll have to see. So the problem with this scenario is that you're rewarding the challenging behavior. And what's probably going to happen in the future is that the child won't listen to you until you sweeten the pot again, because we've taught them that when you engage in refusal behavior, then better things come. You get more options rather than if you would have just listened the first time. So the problems with threatening consequences and with bribes in general is that when we remove them, when we no longer use them, then it's very unlikely that the child's going to listen to us and follow through. So like Amanda said, threatening consequences and bribes can be very effective in the short term, but in the long term, they tend to make improving the behavior a lot more difficult. So it's best to avoid them as much as possible, even though they're really natural for us to do as adults, unfortunately. Okay, the last common mistake we want to avoid is inconsistency. So Amanda's mentioned it already a couple of times that consistency is very important because it increases the likelihood of predictability. And when we're able to predict what's going to happen, we know those expectations and we're less likely to feel anxious and we're less likely to engage in challenging behavior. If expectations and rules vary, if they're constantly changing, then it's really easy for people to get confused. And then it's really easy for them to get frustrated, which can lead to challenging behavior. So again, consistency is just going to be really important. So now let's kind of reflect on those 4 common mistakes and talk about what to do instead. So rather than forcing it, we want to shape the behavior. We want to start easy, set our students up or our children up to be successful, and then increase the requirements over time as they're meeting expectations. Rather than threatening consequences, We want to pick our battles, and then later on, if we need to, we can reflect and adapt. So, you know, like Amanda mentioned, if you're in the store, maybe you just try to cut your losses and get out of there as quickly as possible before challenging behavior escalates. And then, you know, next time, okay, I need to make a shorter trip, or I need to pick a better reinforcer. Instead of bribing, we want to use positive reinforcement or positively reinforce. So that's where it comes in really handy to set up rules or expectations beforehand so the child knows what they're working for. So, you know, for example, if we wear our mask and we go into the store, then afterwards we can get pizza. And then lastly, rather than being inconsistent, we want to be consistent, of course. So again, just emphasizing the importance of predictability. Okay, this is question 4. So which common mistake will be the most difficult for you to avoid? And you can choose any of these, you can choose multiple of them, or you can none of them, or maybe a different one. It's up to you. So go ahead and think about that for a minute, and then we will wrap up. Just some quick reminders about the certificate of completion. If you'd like one, you need to email me all of your answers. If any of them are incomplete or incorrect, we'll need to chat about that. This could affect the time it takes for you to receive your certificate or your eligibility to receive one. As a reminder, you have a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, to watch the video and submit your answers to me here, heather@providencebehaviortherapy.com. If you're looking for more support related to mask wearing in particular or other behavior needs, Providence Behavior Therapy offers one-on-one behavior therapy, parent training or parent support, behavior evaluations and assessments, social skills groups, workshops, and free events. They're kind of similar. So community workshops that occur periodically, as well as some pre-recorded workshops. And I can also offer private agency workshops as well. I provide ARD, if you're here in the state of Texas, that's what we like to call it, or IEP support. And then staff support and training, but obviously that just requires a little more discussion between different groups of people. So you can check out our website for more information, or you can contact me. Some other events we have, these first 2 flyers are for pre-recorded workshops. The first one is an introduction to special needs for caregivers. So for people like extended family members, babysitters, maybe new paraprofessionals that are working with children who have special needs, just to get kind of a baseline understanding of some family dynamics, basic behavior management strategies, and teaching and playing skills, how to address those. We have a pre-recorded workshop on toilet training, which is pretty clear, I think. And then I like to just remind people with this third flyer, we do have a free monthly online support group for parents of kids with special needs. And that's all we've got for you guys. So here's our contact information. If you don't follow PBT on social media, please consider that. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. You are also welcome to leave a review on Facebook or on Google Business. If you have any questions or concerns related to the presentation, please feel free to reach out to me. I can also forward any questions to Amanda. But that's all we've got for you guys. So good luck with trying to get your children to wear face masks, and be safe. Thanks.